up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to the second part of the series, How We Get Fat and How to Fix It. Today we're going to go over some additional hormones not discussed in the first episode. And we need to go over these hormones because these hormones play a role in our action. The first hormones that we listed in the first part of the series were hormones associated with fat storage or with energy expenditure or with fat transportation or energy transportation in the blood. These hormones are going to be more action-based hormones, the hormones that cause us to take action, and the hormones that are secreted, pre-making a decision on food, whether that be what kind of food or how much to eat or whatever. These are the hormones that are associated with that. So it's important for us to go over those hormones as well, so you can get the big picture of what I'm trying to describe here. Right, buddy? The first one we're going to discuss today is dopamine. We've all heard of dopamine before, and dopamine is actually discussed quite a bit. What dopamine is, it's the pleasure hormone and also the reward hormone in our brains. And so if we're going to feel good about something, we have to have plenty of dopamine secretion. If we're going to feel well balanced and if we're going to feel content and if we're going to ward off depression, then we're going to need dopamine. Dopamine essentially is a warm hug from your grandmother as far as the hormones are concerned. It just makes us feel good, and we need it. We need it to survive, and we need it to be thriving individuals. So that's the first one. Dopamine is secreted by the brain, and it can be secreted in response to a lot of different things externally, and we're going to get more into that later. The second hormone that we're going to discuss is ghrelin, and ghrelin is known as the hunger hormone, right, buddy? And so when our stomach is empty, it secretes ghrelin, and ghrelin tells us to eat, and it makes us have food cravings. Ghrelin is also responsible for controlling the amount of energy we expend. And so ghrelin also controls whether we're going to get up and be active or whether we're going to sit on the couch all day and do nothing and just watch TV and check our Facebook and Instagram page over and over and over and over. So it's important to discuss ghrelin as well for that reason. The ghrelin is secreted from the gastrointestinal tract, so it has a lot to do with our stomachs. The last hormone is leptin, and leptin is actually secreted by our fat cells, right, buddy? And so our fat cells communicate through a series of signals to the brain, hormonal signals, that regulates energy expenditure and the amount of fat stored from food that we eat. And it also adjusts the sensation of hunger. So the more leptin that is secreted, the hungrier we are, and the less active we want to be. And so to put it simply, the less body fat you have, the less amount of body fat you have, the more leptin is going to be secreted from the fat cells to the brain, and it's going to tell the brain that you're starving and you need to eat more food, and it's going to give you more cravings. Now, leptin in response to most foods nowadays is unjust, and our leptin cycle can be permanently broken by some foods. So what leptin would do is keep us from starving to death. Once our body fat gets to a certain low level in nature, we would have to gorge to gain some fat to ensure our bodies that we were going to survive. And so leptin is an important hormone for survival purposes, much like the other two. Okay, moving forward, the next word we're going to discuss is addiction. Addiction is being abnormally tolerant to and dependent on something that is psychologically or physically habit forming. And it's important to say a high tolerance, because everyone with a drug addiction gets such a high tolerance to that drug. They need more and more and more of it to exert the same effects that it might have initially. Or alcohol, for that matter. Someone might need more and more and more alcohol than they did initially to get the same reaction that they got in the beginning. So that is why alcohol and narcotics are so addictive, is because initially the dose you needed to exert a specific effect is tolerated, and you need to up the dose, until you're having astronomical amounts of the drug. So that's addiction, and it's important to go over that. before we move any further. Okay, let's go over some more definitions real quick. These are ones that I kind of made up because this is my personal opinion on these two categories. So the first definition is real food. And real food is found in nature in the same state that it is consumed in. Meaning that if you cut a piece of meat off a cow and you can consume it, that is real food because you didn't do anything to that meat. However, if you take that meat through an extensive process and add in artificial colors, artificial flavors, artificial chemicals like monosodium glutamate, and turn it into Jimmy Dean sausages, that to me isn't considered a real food because it's going through an extensive process. If you eat lettuce and that lettuce is pulled from the ground and it's on your plate the same exact way it came from the plant, then that would be a real food. However, a Triscuit would not be a real food because there's no Triscuit bush. Does that make sense? So real food is on your plate essentially the same way that it is found either on a plant or on an animal with little to no processing. That's my definition of real food. The second one is food-like product. And a food-like product is a combination of chemically modified and genetically modified food particulates with man-made colors, flavors, and sweeteners. So if we're going to feed our kids Fruit Loops, first we have to take a cane, and through extensive processing we extract some sugar. And then we have to take corn that's already previously genetically modified, and we take that corn and we extract the fructose from it. A high amount of fructose. It's about 60% fructose. And then what we do is we combine that with genetically modified wheats, and we strip the wheat down to where it's mostly just the gooey protein substances. And then we combine the sugar with the genetically modified wheat, and then we add in artificial colors, artificial flavors, and artificial sweeteners on top of that. And that is a product, and that is not real food. So it's consumable, meaning your body can ingest it, and that doesn't necessarily make it food. To me, I mean, I could probably cut this marker up and eat it, but I wouldn't really consider that food. So you've got to be able to distinguish in your mind a food product from actual real food, because food is found in nature, and some of the most toxic stuff that we consume nowadays is not found in nature, it's man-made. So it's important to distinguish those two from each other. So, food is on your plate the exact same way. It's either on a plant or on an animal with zero processing. A food product is an extensively processed substance that resembles food and that is consumable, but I wouldn't consider it real food. Okay, so to put this all together just a little bit more so you can kind of sort of begin to understand just what in the heck I'm talking about. These are some examples of food-like products. Sugar. Sugar is not found in nature. Sugar as its chemical component is found in foods, but sugar as a component is not found in nature. Meaning, you're not going to find table sugar in nature. You're not going to find maple syrup in nature. You're not going to find agave nectar in nature. These things are actually produced by man. And they have to go through an extensive process to be made into the consumable form or the food product form. Even maple syrup goes through an extensive process before it's consumable. So it's not a food. It's a food-like product. So sugar, or examples of things that are made with sugar, candy, pastries, ice cream. White flour, wheat flour, but white flour would be a derivative of wheat flour. That's going to include pasta, bread, cake, cookies, etc. White potatoes. Well, it's important that we go over this. White potatoes and corn are found in nature, so that's a gray zone for most people, or even for most in-depth nutritionists. Those are a gray zone. Let me better break this down. Corn is a Native American product. Corn has been cultivated for thousands of years and selected for thousands of years for the traits that it had 100 years ago. Now, since then, we've genetically modified pretty much all corn on the planet. And so corn is one of those things where just through selective breeding for thousands of years, it is now different than the way it would be found in nature. Maize, or the derivative plant from corn, used to only have one polyp at the end, or one little corn kernel at the end of a blade of grass. And then just through selective breeding for thousands of years, we have what we have now. So corn is not found in nature. It is man-made. So let's get that straight. Secondly, white potatoes are not found in nature at all. Those are also man-made, and through selective breeding, we have what we have today. Potatoes actually aren't from Ireland also. Potatoes are from the Andes Mountains in South America. They ended up in Ireland in the 1600s, and since the 1600s, we as humans have been selectively breeding potatoes to get the traits that we most wanted out of them. Specifically, more starch and faster growing, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So potatoes as we know them and corn as we know it are not found in nature. These are man-made or man-cultivated. So, getting that out of the way. White potatoes, or chips, fries, gluten-free products. Most of the gluten-free products have potato flour, which is actually pretty bad for you. Another reason why the gluten-free diet is probably one of the worst diets you could ever follow if you're eating their products. Corn. Now we're going to say corn chips or corn flour. Corn flour is also found in gluten-free products. So if we think about this a little further, aren't most of these things a combination of this kind of stuff? For example, gluten-free cookies. They have sugar. They have white potato flour. They have corn flour. So it's a combination of the three. Pastries have sugar. They also have flour. Ice cream has a high amount of sugar, but it also has artificial colors, artificial flavors, etc., etc., etc. And for the most part, it does have gluten. So that would mean that it has some derivatives of wheat flour in it as well. Pasta, wheat flour. Bread, wheat flour. Cake, sugar, and wheat flour. And so most of these things are a combination as well. And for the most part, you can't get one of these junk food products or any junk food product on the market without at least one of these ingredients in it. So these are not real food. This is food-like products. And all the junk food on the shelves has one of these or a combination of these three ingredients in it. Okay, so now it's important to realize how the food-like products actually manipulate the hormones that we went over a little bit earlier. Now that we know on a scientific level that we react to some food-like products in the same way that we react to drugs or alcohol, there's been several studies linking the same activation in the brain from narcotics or from alcohol that we get from food. And some people's brains can react in the same way. So what that basically means is our brains are stimulated the exact same way by food that they are with drugs or alcohol. Here's exactly why and how, and let me put this all together a little better. Sugar actually increases your dopamine production big time. And as we went over in the beginning, dopamine is the hormone you need to feel good. It makes you happy. It makes you feel like everything's all right. It makes you feel like you're accomplishing something. So if sugar is going to increase that dopamine, you're almost instantly going to feel better about the situation, the same way that an alcoholic would say to themselves, oh, I need to drink to be social, or I need to drink to be able to do this adequately, or to be able to feel okay, or whatever. Now, the sick part about dopamine release as a response to sugar or white flour or anything else on this list is that the more dopamine our brains secrete, the more dopamine our brain needs in order to get the same initial effect. So if you remember what addiction is having a high tolerance, then having symptoms of withdrawal whenever whatever substance is taken away. So you get symptoms of dependency. So if our body downregulates or has a higher tolerance to dopamine, that every time we eat, it's going to secrete a little bit of dopamine if we're eating these food-like products. And our brain's not going to have the perception that any dopamine is being secreted. So what that means is to get the same effect later on, we're going to need to eat more and more and more and more and more. So does that sound familiar? Does that sound something like the definition of addiction that we gave earlier? So it's going to increase dopamine, sugar, white flour, anything else. But a combination of the two is going to do more. So if there's a combination of sugar and white flour for a specific junk food, like for example, like cake. Cake has sugar, flour, and artificial colors and all that kind of crap in it. So cake's going to have a much higher dopamine release than a lot of junk foods. So you're going to need more cake to feel better later on. Or more foods that are a combination of sugar and flour. The second hormone that we talked about earlier was ghrelin. And ghrelin was the hormone that is secreted by our gastrointestinal tract whenever it's empty, signaling us to eat. Well, what sugar and wheat do, and specifically those two, what sugar and wheat do is overproduce ghrelin. So we're always hungry. That's why if you could eat a package of Little Debbie's, whatever, and you're still starving, because it promotes gastric emptying, meaning that food moves through your stomach really, really fast, and then it sends out this huge signal like you're starving. And that's why you could literally eat that stuff all day long. So, the ghrelin signal is amplified, and that essentially is telling your brain that you're starving when your ghrelin symbol is amplified. And then our last one is leptin. And leptin is the hormone that our fat cells secrete to our brains. And it tells us to be active. It tells us to burn off energy once we get it. So if leptin worked properly, it would signal the brain to eat when we're lower percentage of body fat. So we gain some body fat. And what it would also do is whenever we were heavy, it would signal the brain to have us be very, very active to lower the body fat. So we have a sweet spot in body fat that we're allowed to be at before we're ill. If we have too high of a body fat, we're sick. If we have too low of a body fat, we're sick. To maintain homeostasis, we need our leptin to do its job. We need it to tell us to eat when we're low fat, and we need to tell us to be very, very active when we're overweight. So what this is going to do is it's going to reverse leptin. And by reversing leptin, essentially is what these foods tell our brains to do and tell our bodies to do through chemical process is they tell us to not do anything, to be lazy, and to eat more food. Now, this is crazy because once we're morbidly obese or just even a little bit overweight, by eating these foods, our brain is telling us that we're starving because our leptin is reversed. So leptin at that point is doing what it would do if you were at 4% body fat. It's telling you to eat everything. And likewise, if you were 4% body fat, your brain would tell you to be very, very lazy to conserve energy so you don't get leaner. So by reversing the leptin in your body is telling you to be lazy and not do anything, and that you're starving, so to eat everything in sight. So this is what sugar and wheat flour and corn and potatoes do inside your body, and that's kind of how those hormones work. Okay, as far as now, we've discussed a lot of different definitions. Now let's start to tie those things into each other. So if you eat any of these food products on a regular basis, or food-like products, any sugar, wheat flour, corn, potato, whatever, what you're going to notice is that as soon as you stopped eating it, you would have adverse side effects from stopping the consumption of those foods. And that would indicate an addiction. And so for the most part, all Americans have a food addiction because we consume these foods on a regular basis. Since your body is so used to producing large amounts of dopamine as a reaction to consumption of sugars and flours, etc., your body would virtually want to conserve dopamine at any other time. And so you would go into an initial stage of depression. And that's one of the only things that cannot be offset by eating real foods. I'll get into that a little further. So initially, if you stopped eating any of those foods, you'd be very, very depressed. Your ghrelin would still be working against you because it takes a long, long time for the ghrelin to right itself, and as well as the dopamine, and as well as the leptin. So, but you would still think you were starving if you were to stop eating all these foods. So that's something that can actually be solved by eating whole foods, though. So if you were to eat something like a chicken salad, your stomach probably is going to be atrophied because you're consuming so many food products and not enough real food. So if you're overweight, your gastrointestinal tract is probably atrophied. So you can offset the hunger effects of ghrelin by eating whole foods. However, the cravings will still be there because your leptin will still be broken. And your leptin also controls your energy expenditure. So according to your body, you're still going to be starving, and it's going to want to produce low amounts of energy. So that's where the lethargy or the laziness comes in. That's an actual chemical thing. Your body wants to conserve energy. So you would have a stage of depression, you will be starving, and you will be low energy as soon as you stop eating these foods. So that's why they're so highly addictive. And that's why pretty much everybody has a food addiction, because of these effects that these foods have on our bodies. To offset that, though, if you were to eat real whole foods as the basis of your diet, it is going to correct all these issues in a relatively short period of time. And that's the importance of eating real whole foods. Okay, let's wrap all this information together real quick for the end of this segment. To go through a brief synopsis, let me go ahead and summarize all this stuff. So if our dopamine and our leptin and our ghrelin, these are three biological hormones that are very, very powerful. If these three hormones are working against us, not with us, by eating food-like products, then no one can exert control over a biochemical drive, meaning it doesn't matter how much willpower you have, you're going against a biological drive. So it's never a matter of willpower. It's never a matter of self-control. Cognitive inhibition is impossible when your brain and your stomach and your body fat are all three on a chemical level working against you, not with you. So to summarize all this up, and to summarize exactly the point that I was trying to get to since the very beginning of this video, if you eat food-like products, you are addicted. In order to save yourself from an addiction, or to cure yourself from an addiction, you need to have environmental control, not self-control. There is not an amount of self-control in the world, if you combine all the self-control from everyone on the planet, for one person even to be able to resist biological urges or hormonal urges. What this basically means is there's not something wrong with you because you cannot walk by a plate of chips at night when you're home without eating them. There's not something wrong with you because you can't go out to eat without having the bread at the table. There's not something wrong with you because you eat ice cream at 3 a.m. There's something right with you. These hormones are working the way they should in the body. What this also means is that in order to be successful as a recovering food addict, you have to control your environment, not try to control yourself. You will never be able to control a body that's all out of whack and that has hormones all doing the opposite of what they were originally meant to do. And these hormones are doing that because of the food choices that we have made. Those food-like products are the things that reverse all these chemical processes in our body, and they make it so that we can't have any self-control, or that self-control is not an issue. You would never, as an alcoholic, go sit at the bar and order your food. It's too tempting. You wouldn't be able to get by it. You would never go into a rehabilitation clinic and put a heroin needle on the table and expect no one there to use it after you left the room. And food is the exact same way. You can't put a food addict in a circumstance that is going to put them around it without expecting them to eat it. Now the hard part is the entire world is filled with this crap. It's everywhere. It's so common, and everyone's overweight. So it's not a big deal and it's socially accepted. But if these foods in our bodies and in our brains have the same reaction that drugs do, then you need to treat yourself like a recovering drug addict or a recovering alcoholic. Otherwise, you're never going to make it. And it's not about self-control. And I'm sick of people saying that you just need to have some self-control, because that's never going to work for you. And that's never worked for me.
Boom.
Let me go a little further and say that people that are in shape are not in shape because of their willpower or their self-control. All my clients make strides with their physique and with their health, not because of an unbelievable amount of self-control, but because one of the fundamentals that we teach here is environmental control. So, essentially what that means is you will never wake up at 3 a.m. and make a chicken salad, because that's a real food, and real food works the way it's supposed to in the body on a chemical basis. So if the junk food's not in the house, you're not going to eat it. So the environment that you need to control is home. We're busy at work, and we're so busy that our mind can be taken off of food-like products. So regardless of the severity of the addiction, you can control yourself at work for the most part. The thing that gives us the problem is our houses. That's our comfort zone. That's where we go to recuperate and rest and enjoy our families. And that's the place that we cannot have these food-like products or these drugs tempt us. It will never be successful for you. And I don't know a single person that's been successful long-term without tightly controlling their environments. So, if you're going to be a fit person, if you're going to be a healthy person, if you're going to be progressive at getting your body where it needs to be and to be an example for everyone around you, you're going to exert environmental control, and you're not going to give a crap about self-control, because that's a misnomer. That never works for anybody.